Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to Rattlecast number 272. Thanks so much for joining me. Lexi Pelle is here. We'll be with her in about 5 minutes, but before we get into it, I should say that Rattle is a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry. We've been a continued publication since 1995 and unaffiliated with any other organization. We just do all this because we love poetry. And I know you do too, so please do click on the like button and share. Make sure you're subscribed. Ring the bell for notifications. And whatever you can do to help spread poetry around the internet would be much appreciated. Now, as always, we're going to start with our Poet Respond poem. And our Poet Respond poet is not here. They're in India, and I wasn't able to get in touch with them. I'm not sure. It's really early in the morning there, too, as you know, if you watch the prompt lines later. And so Ziqr Peehu had this wonderful poem, Spotify Wrapped comes out as. And interestingly, Ziqr was first appeared in last year's Rattle Young Poets anthology. So it's a very young poet. I think they're, high school age, maybe just graduated high school, which is incredible considering how great the lines are in this poem. It's one of the testaments to how good the Rattle Young Poets anthology is, to have poets like these from all around the world, too. And Spotify Wrapped is one of those things where I had fun with it too. My daughter was talking about it. It was just a lot of fun doing all the Spotify Wrapped. We got about 5 or 6 poems submitted about it. And so it was fun to have a poem that tied everything together that was in the news today. So many poems about the murder of that healthcare CEO too, which comes up here. And it was really cool to see how Ziqr put that together. And the note, let me read the note for you that Ziqr included. Ziqr said this: I wrote the first version of this poem titled Spotify Wrapped comes out as Danny Matterson's Jury Rules Not Guilty last year, also for Rattle's Poets Respond, around the same time, in an almost helpless fashion, talking about how people don't care about things that are truly important and are happy being in their little corner, talking about their favorite artists and nothing else. This year, South Korea's martial law was declared, then taken back within hours on the day Wrapped was released, and Brian Thompson was also shot and killed. Both invoked the same kinds of reactions from the people, mass collectivization and joy, and it's brought back a level of certainty in my life that I have not had in so long, a sort of faith in the way this world works and hopefully will continue to work. That's it, I think. That's all there is to it. I feel safe about the world for now. However, next year may be, and I think there's a little bit of sarcasm and irony in that note too. Let me read the poem for everybody. And I just really, like I said, some great lines in this, and really captured a lot of the things people were writing about too, all in one poem. So here we go. This is, again, Ziqr Peehu's Spotify Wrapped comes out as. Spotify Wrapped drops like a priest's robe, a holy unveiling. You were 97% melancholy, a top listener of rainstorms recorded in tin buckets. Somewhere in Seoul, the president scrawls martial law like a toddler with crayons, blunt and trembling. The streets answer in pitchforks and foghorns, a symphony of breathless mothers and students with gasoline hearts. For 3 hours, the nation is a mouthful of broken teeth until the people swallow the law whole, chew it down to a pulp. At dawn, the decree retreats like a wet dog, tail between its legs, the ink on the paper still drying, still reeking of ash. On my phone, Spotify chirps, your favorite genre is destruction. Meanwhile, in New York, a healthcare CEO is unstitched by a bullet. His chest opens like a Velcro wallet, and inside nothing but receipts. On the streets, the people rejoice, not with candles, but with fireworks, sparks caught in the teeth of the night. Spotify suggests a playlist for the mood, songs to mourn corrupt billionaires. I imagine the algorithm is sentient, and somewhere in its digital brain it's weeping. Over us, over itself, over the world's tendency to bite its own tail. I listen to the sound of glass being swept, of cities exhaling, of monuments crumbling like sugar cubes in coffee. By evening, the headlines are a Picasso painting, shattered bodies, crooked timelines, colors bleeding into each other. The president releases a public apology. The people remix it into a club anthem. The CEO's obituary reads like the back of a cereal box. Ingredients, greed, neglect, a pinch of humanity. At midnight, I watch my Wrapped one last time. It tells me nothing about the year except that I am human, that I prefer crescendos to silence, that sometimes the most played song isn't a song at all, but the sound of the people dragging themselves through the wreckage, singing off-key, but still singing. That was today's poem, again by Ziqr, Peehu. Spotify Wrapped comes out as another in a long line of the sort of amalgam poems we do. We had one early on called the Presidential Daily Brief about 10 years ago in Poet Respond that I always think of. That's another one that captures a lot of what's going on in the world today, which is so fun to do. And if you'd like to share your poems about the news, all you got to do is go to rattle.com/respond, find the Poet Respond link. Anything in the news last week is up for grabs, and we love hearing poems about it. Now we're going to take a quick break and go to our main guest, Lexi Pelle. So sit tight and we'll be right back with more poetry. And we're back. Like I said, today's guest is Lexi Pelle. Lexi's a poet and editor living in New Jersey. She was the winner of the 2022 Jack McCarthy Book Prize, a Pushcart nominee and a finalist for the Prufer Poetry Prize, Crosswinds Poetry Prize, and the Marvin Bell Poetry Prize. Her work has appeared in issue 81 of Rattle, Poet Respond, Ninth Letter, SWWIM, Sucarnochee, Review, and The Shore, among other places. You can find all her work at Lexi Pelle, that's LEXIPELLE.org. And here she is, Lexi Pelle. Hey, Lexi, how you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm great. It's really fun to have you on. You know, one of those people that I really rely on to have great poems for Poet Respond. And so, without, there's like a couple dozen poets like you maybe that like make it so that the whole thing actually works, because there's always going to be something good because you send something very frequently. And it's great to have you on talking about your first book, Let Go with the Lights On. Do you want to start out with a poem from it?
Sure. I'm gonna be reading. You need the page numbers, right?
Oh, I got it. Yeah, don't worry about it.
Okay. This is a poem called 2000's Eyebrows. Sometimes a little sperm-shaped, always thin and deliberate as pop singers, Stefani, Spears, Shakira, sitting crisscross on the closed toilet, Scarlett, whose mother I never saw after 7 p.m. and who never asked me if I was allowed to drink Starbucks, said, "Eyebrows are sisters, not twins," as we tweezed tiny tire irons onto our face using a magnifying mirror. My mother suggested we follow our natural shape, but of course we didn't listen. We weeded the furrow, carefully crafted correct symbols as if readying ourselves to agree with everything our boyfriend said was over our heads. Years later, lying on a sheet of crinkly paper on a plastic bed, I watched the waxer blow on the popsicle stick before the hot strip ripped a scythe into my raw pink skin. I know now they're out of fashion. Bushy is back, as is strong and bold and feathered. I'm not asking for a comeback. All I'm trying to say is I've spent years trying to grow out the look of surprise on my face.
Yeah, and that was 2000's Eyebrows by Lexi Pelle from her book Let Go with the Lights On, which is available from Write Bloody Books. And so, Lexi, you can see in that poem two of the main characteristics of your work, which I'd say you have a beautiful music to your poems, and also a lot of pop culture references. Like it's very set in time, and a lot of things that you're referring to. And it makes me wonder. I feel like there's like two kinds of poets. There's poets that are like aiming for sort of a timelessness, and like they don't want to have those kind of references in their poems. And then there's poems that like load it in and love that idea of it being fixed in a space. And so it makes me wonder like what you think about as far as those all those references that you have in all these poems.
Yeah, I mean, I love pop culture. I think it's very fun. I find it very inviting. I think people sometimes who maybe are a little hesitant about reading poetry, when they see or hear pop culture references in a poem, they feel like, oh, okay, this is not beyond the scope of my understanding. So I think that's one part of it. And the other part of it is I just find it like a little presumptuous to know like what is not gonna like there are things in like Shakespeare's work that I have to look up. So I just like how do you know what's going to be relevant in, 100 years? So it just seems kind of like absurd. If it works in the poem, why cut it out simply because it's like I mean my work especially is usually responding to something modern. So there's that, but I just think the idea that you have to cut something out because it like people might not get it in the future or something just seems if it's working, why cut it out? Because you don't know like and also I think that there's like a little bit of pleasure when I'm reading a poem and I have to look something up because I'm like, oh, okay, that now, okay, like, it gives me context. So I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing if people don't get it. But yeah, I mean, and also I just enjoy it. I think it's fun.
Yeah, it's true. When I, especially reading the poet response submissions, when there's something that I have no idea what it's about, I actually love that because I love looking up like who the hell is this person, and then I get to go down this whole rabbit hole. I'm supposed to be reading submissions, but you end up reading Wikipedia pages and looking online about memes and things like that. And so that's always a fun aspect just of learning through poetry, which is something maybe we forget so often as we talk about other ways. What was your introduction into poetry? Like, what was the route that you took to become a poet? Was it something that you always wanted to do? Was there some certain instigating incident that made you fall in love with poetry?
So what I always tell people is I've never not considered myself a poet because I never considered poetry a job. Like I was just like, oh, this is this thing that I do. And I never really like looked into it. I was like, oh, when I die, they'll find all my notebooks. And like that's what happens. Like that's how a poet is a poet or something. Like I never, luckily I've never in my life felt like, oh, I can't do this because I just have always been writing. So that was kind of like a fun thing. But then I was kind of faced with like I think a lot through Instagram and stuff, like I could kind of see how people were making a career out of it. And I was like, oh no, that's scary. Like I like not knowing. Like I like the idea of like someone unearthing all my journals or something like that. But yeah, and then I just kind of felt more and more called to it and taking it more seriously and like doing workshops and stuff. And I'm in school now because I eventually do want to get an MFA. So I kind of realized like, oh, this is something that I really do want to take more seriously. But I've always written since I was young. I think I read like a biography on Emily Dickinson when I was in like second, third grade, and I was just like, oh, I love this.
Do you remember the first poem you loved?
First poem I love, there was a poem by Pablo Neruda that I really, really loved because I loved all of Emily Dickinson's work, but I don't think I understood it at that age. I liked the way it sounded. I liked the way it like felt. I don't think it resonated with me, but there was a Pablo Neruda poem, and unfortunately I don't have my copy of the book that I was reading from anymore, but it was like really lovely, and I think it had like a carousel in it, and I remember thinking it was such a striking image, and from that moment on I started like collecting images. I was like, oh, like that's really interesting. So I started collecting images, and that kind of is what has been like an inspiration for me for a long time. I recently heard Danusha Ramirez call it like a poetry pantry. And that has very much resonated with me because that's what I've always done. I'm like, oh, here's an interesting image that I might put in a poem one day or something, and just like words and images and kind of things that I can go to and look at and reference.
So is that like do you fill up notebooks with things and then go back to them later? Is that a big part of your process?
Well, when I'm stuck, like if I'm writing a poem and I'm like, oh, okay, like where do I go from here? I sometimes look for like, okay, well, what images have intrigued me in the past? Or like sometimes I use it as like a prompt. Like if I have something I want to tackle, I might go to that and say, okay, well, I have to add this in and see like then I have to now connect two different dots because they're not related. I didn't write that thing down in relation to the topic that I want to write about because as you've probably seen from a lot of my work, it's usually just like the title is like the thing that I'm interested in and then I write about it. So that's kind of what happens is I write a title that's like very much just what the thing I want to write about is. And then if I have these kind of disparate images, I'm like, okay, well, how do I make that connect? So that's kind of how I do it.
Yeah. Well, the next poem up is Diet Coke, which we loved back from last fall's issue, full of great metaphors. We were thinking about it for the Neil Postman Award for metaphors. One of those that was right up there for that. Did that come about that way? Did you say I want to write about Diet Coke, and then you entered the poem after that?
No, that was written in a workshop with Ellen Bass and Marie Howe. And Ellen Bass had done a prompt and it was based on Thomas Lux's Refrigerator 1957, which is one of my all-time favorite poems. I have it memorized. I think about it all the time. And so when she was like, "Oh, we're going to do this poem," I was like, "Yes." So I think that I very much tried to write it in that style. But what's funny is that the reason I love both Marie Howe and Ellen Bass, but I have often been told I go very overboard with metaphor. And so I had to really like study Marie Howe's work to kind of learn how to pare it back a little bit. Because I would just go off into La La Land. And I remember thinking this poem, like, I'm like, wow, I really scaled it back. I didn't do that much here. Because this is one of like the older poems in the book. But there was actually so the way the workshop worked was they broke us up into like so half the time you'd work with Ellen and half the time you'd work with Marie and it was Ellen's prompt but I was working with Marie at the time and she would have you read the poem and she is like the most incredible editor in like an editing witch because like you'd read the poem and then she'd sit and she'd go like this and she'd be like okay, cut that line. She didn't have it in front of her. She just did it in her head. I was
Wow.
like, I don't know how anyone could do that. But anyway, she had me cut like this entire middle section where I just went on and on about like soda and vending machines and all this like just this complete tangent and she was right. I mean, it was and then I submitted it. Actually, this is one of the few poems that I didn't do much editing to other than cutting out that middle bit and then I sent it to you. And I remember I just finished it and I saw that you were looking for prompt poems and so I sent it like there was like no time to do anything to it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Sherman Alexi emailed me and said that that was his favorite poem that he read in a long time because he loves Diet Coke so much and no one had ever described it any better than that. Do you want to go ahead and read this poem?
Yeah.
Okay.
Diet Coke. All I saw my mother drink for years. In the diner served with a striped straw and shredded paper beanie, or sometimes at Stop and Shop just before checkout, its perfect plastic body pulled from the squat fridge that sits underneath the conveyor belt, but most often sipped from a silver can on the porch. She never asked for ice, never dared to dilute the fizzy pollution of artificial sweeteners. The first time I tried it, I thought it tasted like a backhanded compliment. Surprisingly good. The dark, dizzying lake, like a cactus, burped Splenda into my mouth, the flavor so far from milk or juice, like a fresh squeezed robot, a supermodel's saliva. My sister and I sat around her like the students of Socrates and watched her succumb to the only sweetness she ever allowed herself. A true mother, listening to the questions it spat into the air, voice lifted at the end of every swallowed sentence. Let's play the quiet game, she suggested on long car trips to Hershey or to one of Kate's soccer tournaments, and only then could we all hear it whisper to her from the cup holder as a speed bump puddled the lid and she brought the spill to her lips.
So that was Diet Coke by Lexi Pelle from her book Let Go with the Lights On. And you mentioned that being a prompt poem. What was the prompt again that generated that?
I think it was to write a poem with like a lot of thingitude, like with a lot of objects, or like it was very based in the material world. And so that was kind of where that poem came about. And yeah, like I said, we were looking at the Thomas Lux poem. So it was very much, I tried to kind of write in that style, which I love. And so yeah, I think the prompt might have just been to write a poem with thingitude,
Yeah.
which I love.
So, and then it turns really quickly to your mother, and that's like, she's such a great character in that poem. Did you know that you were going to be writing about her, or was it one of those things that the subconscious pulled up and you didn't realize that's where it was going?
Um, well, yeah, I mean, Diet Coke is so like it's like inextricably linked to my mom. So yeah, I think I did definitely know that that's where it was going. She's also like a major theme in my writing, and so I find that like whenever I'm stuck, like I was recently in a workshop and I wrote a poem and everyone was like, "Oh wow, how did you do that?" And it was just another poem about my mom. I was like, "Well, it's kind of like my party trick." I'm like, "Oh, I'll just write about my mom because I have a lot to say." And I think she is someone I think in relation to Thingitude, I think writing about her, it's very imagistic in my mind, like my memories of her, there's just a lot of images there. So it's very easy. She's a very easy thing to write about, and I like describing her. And so yeah, so that was kind of an easy fit for me.
Yeah. Well, let's hear the next poem. Next up, we have Goods, I think.
Yes. Goods. Couldn't look the cashier in the eye as I placed Diet Coke and cheap concealer on the counter while Heather hid another lip gloss in her hoodie. Later, our loot spread out on her living room floor, she said to me, "Not wanting to get caught isn't the same thing as being a good girl." My whole life shifted a little on its fault line. Morality, that meat-eating plant, bloomed muscular guilt in my gut. Once I put my allowance back in my mom's purse for her to notice, but she didn't. Stopped two bullies in front of a teacher. I stood in the dark of my father's front lawn, looking into my lit bedroom window, trying to see if anything could be seen from the street. But there was no girl, uneven breasts straining in a stained white bra, squeezing at her skin. I kept a diary of good things I didn't do in case I died and people needed a reason to keep loving me. How could I think I was better than everybody else? Like the loose strands of hair I unstuck from my lip gloss, I wore myself poorly. When we left that CVS, Heather was the one smiling. My goods tossed into a paper bag, my pockets empty.
Yeah, and that was Goods by Lexi Pelle. Um, so what is your writing process like? You mentioned that Diet Coke poem is a rare poem that isn't edited much except for cutting a chunk. So I assume you do a lot of editing. But when you sit down and approach the poem, how do you do that? And how does the poem come to be in its final version?
Well, I'm one of those people who like I edit as I go, so I'm not like just writing and then I get to the end. Like very rarely does that happen. Occasionally I can do that, but almost always I'm like I have to have the first line right. I kind of, and then even after I've done all that, I go back and edit everything anyway. But like even with this poem, like Goods, like I really liked the idea of not starting with like I couldn't. I really liked the idea of like couldn't. And it took me like a while to figure out why I didn't like I couldn't. And so that was like one of those lines, like I couldn't even move on to the next line until I had that right. And I also am I don't know a lot of people who do this, but I write in the form it's going to be in. So like I can see it in my head. I'm like, oh, this poem's going to be in couplets or this poem's going to be all one. I don't know why, but like I have to have that in my mind. Very rarely does a poem change form for me. Like I have to know what the form is because that helps me picture where I'm going to go and where the lines are probably going to end, which is very strange, but that is something that I do.
Oh, well, that's interesting. That's something I haven't heard before. I don't think. So how early on in the writing do you see that form? Is it before you even start, or is it with the first line?
Yeah, it's usually like before I start or like with the first line, like where I want to break that line. I'm like, oh, okay. And then I immediately see the shape. I'm like, okay, this is going to be like a short um, poem. This is going to be a longer lined poem. And it helps me like with the pacing too, like how long I want the lines to actually, as I'm writing it, I'm like, oh, well, if it's going to be really short, maybe I want them to sound a certain way. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's very odd. I don't know of anyone else who does this, and I don't know why my brain does it, but it is useful for me because I can kind of feel what the line is going to look like, which helps me write it.
Mm-hmm. Is that a visual? Like do you actually see like the shape of it, and then you're like filling in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very, very odd. I don't really know how to like explain it, but I think also too, it kind of helps me like fit the intention and like the speed of the poem. Like, is it going to be a kind of more contemplative poem? If it's narrative, do I want it to be kind of winding or do I want it to be kind of fast? And so it kind of helps me like think about like, am I going to go really image heavy? Am I going to be really sparse? So I kind of like, I think that's why I like it because I kind of then have an idea of like what I want to do and how I want the poem to sound. So.
Hmm. Yeah, well, that's interesting. And then once you do that, once you have the shape that you're going for, like what is the editing process like? Is it a lot of cutting and moving around? Like how many drafts do you go through for each poem?
I mean, it depends. Usually a lot. What's funny is that almost all of my, hold on, let me think. All of my Rattle poems have had almost no editing, which is like very rare. And then none of the other poems in this book are like that. But the Bat poem for the Poets Respond, that was the first um, news poem I'd ever written in my life. That poem was like pretty quick. Like it took a little while to get the last line, which I had messed around with, but like it was pretty like there, like from the beginning. And but yeah, I mean, usually I'm editing a lot. I edit a lot for sound. I edit a lot for like wordiness. That's something that I'm always really like looking at because I can be kind of wordy and want to pack a lot in, especially if I'm getting excited with the figurative language. Um, I'm always looking for like concision, wordiness. Am I being true enough? That's the other thing that I'm always looking at because sometimes like there's a thing where I kind of know how I can turn a poem, but if I know it ahead of time, it's not like a true turn, so then it doesn't feel honest. So then sometimes I'll like write something and I'll be like, wow, this sounds really great. And then like I'll look at it like a couple days later, I'm like, I kind of knew what I was doing. That's very formulaic. So I then go back and I like fix it or take it out or try, what if I start with that turn and then I have to move on from there and stuff like that. So it really depends. But I am like a pretty vigorous editor and I have someone who edits all my work, Tara Skirt, who edits all of my poems. So she also helps me a lot and cuts out a lot of the figurative language.
Yeah, how do you know that a poem hasn't been over edited? Yeah, that's not the thing that I see a lot is, it happens over and over again where I sometimes people will accept a poem and then they'll say, "Oh, I was working on this for a long time, and since I submitted it, and this is the new version, and the new version loses all of its like energy. There's a sense of like being workshopped to death, both maybe in trying to please everybody, which comes up a lot, but also like polishing out that like initial impulse of like whatever it is that like drove you to write the poem, and so over edited poems tend to feel really flat. But reading yours, I it never occurred to me that there's some poems came out in a rush and some poems were heavily edited. So how do you avoid over editing if you're editing a lot?
I mean, my biggest method is I only show it to Tara before I send it. So because what happens is you do get a lot of, I used to not do that and I used to get a lot of feedback and like, someone would say they'd love this line and so I wouldn't want to cut it even if I kind of knew I should or someone would say cut this and then I'd be self-conscious about it because I'm like, oh, so I found like if you can find one person you really trust, that kind of prevents that thing where you're overthinking it. And I often like I'm like, if Tara says it's done, it's done. That's kind of like my go-to. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's important not to. I mean, it's very, I think, evident in a lot of my poems that like I'm really trying to have fun. So if the fun is gone, then it's like something is lost. And that's kind of how I think of it is like if I don't feel like excited, if it doesn't make me kind of like smile or like I'm like, oh yeah, like that was a funny thing that I wrote about, or like, I kind of it's kind of a gut feeling, but I think that the word for me and with my work, and maybe it's circling back to your intention with your poems. And for me, I want my readers usually to have fun. Like usually with most of my like, especially more recently with my more recent work, even if they take more serious turns, like if I don't have that like core of like I'm trying to give you this gift of fun, then I've gone off track somewhere. So maybe it's like returning to the core of why you wrote the poem. And if that's gone, then maybe you have gone too far in editing.
Hmm. Well, I'm going to get back to that fun in a little bit, but let's read another poem first. Next up is The Nuns Came by Bus, which is a fun title. Start with.
Well, that's I like I oh, so that's the other thing with my writing method. Like I really am title focused. If I get the title right, I'm like, okay, got a poem. Like that's very important to me, and I'm very interested in titles. The nuns came by bus, shuffled up to the pale blue and pink entrance, received special wristbands to ride all the rides for free. It was my third day working charoplanes, a metal jellyfish that thrust tourists in the air when I hit the green button. What happens if I hit the red button? I asked Mr. Gigliotti. He said, don't hit the red button. From my warm plastic booth, I watched the nuns move around the park. Ice cream leapt from a kid's cone as they approached a game. They lined up and played everything. This was the year I decided not to make my confirmation. I felt naked in my spaghetti straps and shorts as I checked that each sister had pulled down the metal bar and clipped the chain between the folds of her habit. They rose like crows and circled the morning sky, arms raised. I touched the red button, but didn't press it.
Yeah, that's another poem by Lexi Pelle. That was The Nuns Came by Bus. And you mentioned titles, and there are great titles in your work. What do you think goes into a really good title?
Well, I'm a very selfish title writer. So I write like what I would find interesting. Like if it makes me kind of like laugh or if it kind of draws me in. But I think there's something about again like invitation. And I think there are a lot of really beautiful titles that don't do that. Like they don't really give you a lot of context and that's really fun too. But I find to get me writing, like to be consistent, I care a lot about being prolific, like because I don't want to ever not be writing. So I think that for me, if I'm have a more obscure title, I might kind of feel like, well, I don't know where I'm going with this. For me, a title is very grounding. It's like the structure of the house. I'm like, okay, you're writing about the time that the nuns came by bus. So like you have your focus. Like so it's very easy and oftentimes my titles are either like the first line or give you the context for the poem. So that's kind of what I think about. But I also do really love a more like, oh, why did they title the poem that way? But that's not how I write.
Do they always come first, like as a locus of attention, maybe, or do sometimes they come at the end?
Almost always they come first. I have a couple in the collection, like my poem Etymology. Didn't come first. That took a really long time to figure out. Highlights, the poem highlights. So the original title of the poem highlights was The Waiting Room, but I didn't want it to seem like a reference. I was like, no, that doesn't work. But that was kind of like a temporary title. So that was so yeah, so sometimes I don't have a title in mind, but that's only if like the first line has come to me in some sort of way and I'm like, okay, I want this to be the first line, but very rarely, almost always the title is the first thing that I've written.
Hmm. And so I assume that the title to the book applies even more strongly too, right? You have to have a great title for a book. So where did this title come from? It's a little bit unusual because I didn't see a direct, like it didn't come from a line from a poem, I don't think, and it didn't come from the title of a poem for sure. So how did you end up titling the poem or the book this?
Um, this is like the most unromantic way of titling. I just needed a title, and I didn't have all the poems written. And I thought to myself, like, oh, I'll write a poem with that title. That sounds cool. And then I just never did. Um, but in terms of like what I wanted, I knew that I really liked the idea of having a book that was interested in intimacy and like being like especially because a lot of these books are about like being very young and like kind of looking at that and kind of surrendering to what you know and what you don't know. And so I liked the idea of having that and I really liked with the lights on because it felt kind of like permission to be more vulnerable. So that was kind of how the title came. And I thought that eventually a poem would come with that title and it never did. And so I just left it because I do think it fit. And I also think because a lot of the poems titles are so specific to the poem, they wouldn't have really worked as an overarching title for the collection. So I think that was also the tricky part. So I probably could have pulled like a line um, from one of the poems, but it was kind of too late. I was too far down
So
into the
how did that?
publishing
How did you
process.
come up with that? Were you playing around with a lot of different titles, or it just pop into your mind?
Yeah, it kind of just popped into my mind. I had like a couple of which is very funny because you put out, which I loved, the Hot Pink Moon. Um, the one of the original titles of the book was going to be Hot Pink Mess.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I was like, oh, that's kind of funny. But then I kind of felt like maybe it was a little too lighthearted for what the collection was and was maybe like a little misleading and it didn't really because I'm very interested in like a big topic in this book is like truth and like what truth is and like our relationship to truth and our relationship to like higher power and stuff like that. And so I kind of wanted to have that and this like let go with the lights on is kind of like surrendering and looking at what it means to surrender and looking at like, that. So I think that's kind of how I came up with it. But yeah, it was just I don't know, it just kind of popped into my head. I had it, I was like, this is like a project that I had like, a couple of things or like words or phrases that I had considered, you know, as inspiration for the title. But then I came up with this and I was like, that seems like the most fitting.
Hmm. Well, let's hear another poem. Let's do Elderly Couple next.
So this is a news poem. It wasn't a recent news poem, it was a news poem that I read about I don't know, many, many years ago. And it stuck with me. And I finally, actually, it was after I wrote the bat poem. I was like, I can do a news poem. So I wrote this one after I wrote the bat poem, even though it wasn't a relevant news story. Elderly couple found dead, buried under snow. The man on top of the woman, frozen like the slice of wedding cake my mother kept for years in the freezer. They'd been there a week. They walked a mile before giving up and lying down 100 yards from the house they couldn't see through the storm. How close we are to what we'll never reach. I imagine her in snow-soaked denim like a pressed flower beneath him. What they said in their final moment. I'd let the flurries melt into our four-poster bed. We'd role-play safety. Not tonight, honey. I'm tired. Pass the hand cream. You get the light.
Yeah, and it's the closest it comes, maybe, to a reference of the title that you get the light line.
Yeah.
That is, elderly couple found dead, buried under snow. And it's another poem with great metaphors. Frozen like the slice of wedding cake my mother kept for years in the freezer. Another simile, I think, that like a pressed flower beneath him. And one of the things, and I mentioned this was we were thinking about it for the Neil Postman Award for Metaphors. Maybe bad news to tell you, but
Well, it's good to know. I prefer to know after that way. I'm like, oh, that's nice, but whatever.
but there, so Diet Coke has a lot of metaphors. There are great metaphors in this poem. But reading for that Neil Postman Award for Metaphor, it's sort of stark. When I put the prize together, I think it was like 15 years ago. I thought, oh, there'll be metaphors all over the place, and I have to like list them and like make like a chart or something, like an Excel spreadsheet, and like rate them. And then when you go through poems, it turns out though, you look like 300 poems we publish every year. You pull out the good metaphors, and there's like 10. There's a few poems that are great extended metaphors. There's a few like really killer metaphors in like a line or two. And the fresh metaphors, you'd think that is like the heart of poetry. They're actually kind of hard to come by. So how do you generate them? Is it a spontaneous part of the writing process, or is it something that you come back to later? We had one of the winners mentioned using it as like a way to you write the poem, then you come back and add things and make the descriptions much more interesting by like just brainstorming on metaphor. So I could see it come both ways maybe, but how do you approach that? Because your poems are full of really good metaphors.
I don't do that. I like that method. I think I'm a rattle nerd. So that was Eugenia Lay. She was talking about the method that Ellen Bass taught. But yeah, which I really do like. Ellen Bass calls it like I think it's like the slit ham method, where like you're like cutting ham and like putting in the I don't know what you put in ham, but whatever you put in ham, But I don't often do that because again, I kind of like to know the shape of the poem. So like the idea of like having a placeholder thing would kind of throw me off. So for me, like I said, I usually get to a line and then I have to kind of figure out what I want to say before I move on. But I'm always looking for things that are specific to me. Like I think that the metaphors um, that don't get cut, that Tara doesn't cut from my work, are usually the ones that are more specific and are not like generic. The pressed flower, I think, only really works because it's the contrast, which Ellen Bass talks about, like where you're comparing something tragic to something beautiful and it's kind of haunting. But I think in general, like if I were to say like, you know, I don't know, he held my hand, it was like a pressed flower or something, it wouldn't really work. But yeah, I think I usually try to make my metaphors and similes like pretty unique to my experience, like the slice of wedding cake my mother kept for years in the freezer. So I think there's something kind of nice about comparing it to something that is specific to your own life or your own kind of perspective, kind of. Like I did that in the bat poem too, where I said it's like Christian kids hopped up on guilt and hormones. Like that's more specific to my specific upbringing. So that's kind of why it worked. Whereas I think sometimes when people are writing metaphors and similes, they kind of go to like the metaphor and simile word bank that like we all have and we've all read and so but yeah, I think that there's like a method to writing metaphors and similes. It's like, well, what can I compare it to in my own life that people wouldn't think of? Or like what are the images that I return to, not like that metaphor returns to. So I think, yeah, I think it's kind of finding that balance.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was just talking to Lou Watts for the spring issue of Rattle and the Haibun issue that we're doing, and Lou mentioned that the thing about haiku that really made his haiku take off when he started to inject the first person in there and have it be actually personal to him rather than trying to have this like meditative distance. And there's something is when it's true, like you mentioned true, and truth does come up throughout this book. It's like the truth of that experience actually being true to you. Somehow like we feel that as readers, still it's a mystery as to why. And why do you think that is? Like, why do you think, like what does truth mean to you? I mean, speaking of truth and what compels you to like put the truth down as directly as you know it personally,
Well, especially, well, like with this poem, the elderly couple poem, like obviously that's not my experience. You can look up the article like online. That's I literally just pulled the title from the title of the article. It was a very sparse article. There wasn't a lot of information. So I think that like there's something about I also feel like it makes the reader trust you because I'm obviously writing about something that hasn't happened to me. I'm not one of the people that died in the snow. So it's just, I think there's something that's like, oh, I don't know how to approach this in any way but myself. And people, I think, maybe see that and they trust you. They're like, oh, you're not trying to like presume like something. And I often do that. Like, I'm like, well, I don't know. And how can I admit? And almost like the truth is admitting that you don't know in various forms. Like every truth is in some way saying like, I don't know, but here is this. And I think that that's kind of where it works. So yeah. So I don't know. I think, but I also think that like there's going beyond the layer of what you would have said. I think that's a lot of what editing is like what do I know how to say and what do I not know how to say? And that's kind of what you're trying to write into is like, what have I not learned yet? That's kind of, it took me a really long time. I never understood when people said discovery. I was like, I don't understand. What do you mean you discover something? Like you only know what you know. Like, but then I really I was like, oh, it's more just like leaning into the not knowing or leaning into the not, being formulaic or being kind of presumptuous or something. Yeah, I don't know. I think, but I do think it's interesting. I'm very interested in truth, even though I have trouble defining it.
Yeah, well, it's always so interesting to me because we talk about like the truth of the details of the poem, which people we can get fixated on, but then there's the broader truth of the whatever it is that and I think of it as like a truth that repeats itself over time and space. Like if there's this like multi-world universe, and in every world this would be true, or the majority of worlds this would be true, and that's a way that the truth resonates with us, because the truth, it's like exists outside of time or something like that, and that's the deeper truth that poems get to. Well, I should say, if you're enjoying this conversation, please do make sure you click the like button, as there always are. There's like 3 times as many people watching live as have clicked like so far. And if I say this, more people will click like, and that really helps. No matter what platform you're watching this on or listening later, it helps to click like. And also, if you have any questions for Lexi, please do leave them in the chat windows, either on Facebook or YouTube right now, and I'll pass them along. But let's hear another poem in the meantime, Lexi.
Okay. I'm going to read Ode to the Way We Move. Ode to the Way We Move. In the inpatient eating disorder program, Carolyn G. taps her foot to the tune of Pasta Night. Sarah takes 4 separate trips to get a pair of scissors, 2 markers, a sheet of paper, and Scotch tape from the craft basket. And Amanda, who signed herself in, just admitted she's been doing crunches on the bathroom floor. To the rules about running and hugging, and to the times we break them. In a group, when Viv's cousin drives 4 hours from Vermont to play Uno during visiting hours, bicep curls in the laundry room with bottles of bleach, arm circles in the shower, how stopping the secret exercise feels like bench pressing a sky swollen with rain. To the little blue boombox we let sing to us before bed, man, I feel like a woman, and the hairbrush microphone Sunita mouths, let's go girls, into. Our small rebellion in the common room of the locked ward. We shimmy our sweats into slip dresses, our bodies loud as a nightclub. Hospital bracelets, bangles we raise above our heads. Paige, former patient turned night nurse, feather boas me toward her with a stethoscope and doesn't for 3 minutes and 45 seconds say anything about the liability of our heart rates. We risk punishment for this. Chug the chalky bottle of Ensure, stay an extra week. Like the hooked fish's last dance against a thrash of air, we are trying to move toward freedom. It's only wrong if anyone who isn't us sees.
And that was Ode to the Way We Move, another poem from Lexi Pelle's Let Go with the Lights On, available from Write Bloody Books. There's some great question already from Jimmy Pappas. He says, on your website, you call yourself an ex-Catholic who grapples with faith and troubling the notion of religion. I'm a lifelong student of the philosophy of religion. Have you reached a conclusion? It's a pretty big, maybe a secular God. So what do you think about all that?
Oh yeah. I was telling Jimmy that I wanted to teach a thing about a secular God, so that's funny. Yes, I have all the answers. Let me tell you right now. Get out your notebook. No, I think that I like the idea of maybe just God as a question. It's just a question that we have to keep asking. I think that's kind of what I've come to through writing this book. Because when I started writing this book, I think this is my first book. So obviously there's a lot of stuff about childhood. I think a lot of people's first books have childhood stuff in it. And I was thinking like, I'm not really religious. I'm not this, I'm not that. But I'm like, I really am a very spiritual person, because that's a big theme in my work. I just not comfortable with all of the trappings of Catholicism and the negative political stuff that goes on with that. But yeah, I don't really have an answer. I do really like the idea though of God being this question that you ask every day, and it being a question that you return to. That's kind of where I'm at right now. And it's kind of what I'm doing with my poems. I often feel like my poems kind of tell me what I'm feeling or where I'm at in a moment in time. And I think that circles back to truth, because I'm not talking about like a set in stone truth that means the truth forever. I'm talking about just the truth of that particular poem. And I think that can change from poem to poem. And I actually like that can change from poem to poem, because otherwise I'd have it all figured out. I'd just write one poem and I'd be done. So yeah, so I think that's where I'm at.
Yeah, well, it's always interesting, talking about religions, and it's sort of almost self-evident, like when you start to really like think about it and question things, like what they get wrong, especially the big major religions.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to look at like what they get right, And as an
Hmm.
ex-Catholic, still, seeking a way to, I guess, quantify or explain spirituality. Like, what do you think that the Catholicism gets right?
I think there's a lot of, well, I think just in general, organized religion, what they get right is, which is funny because it sounds contradictory, but like, is the organization. Like, I think that there's like people, I think, really crave like regular connection with God in some way. And so I think that like there's something about organized religion that if you don't have it, it's really, really hard to find. I mean, I think poets do a pretty good job of finding it, but I think that, and also this kind of like community rallying around a cause. Now, sometimes it's the wrong cause for them, but I do think there's something like really nice about like we have faith and then we're gonna do it to, there are times where it is good, like, helping with like, shelter or like, making sandwiches or something like that. That I think is wonderful. But like, stuff like that where I'm like, oh, this kind of thinking about what it means to be a good person and then actively in a community trying to go out and do good. I think that they really nail that. And I think that people, that structure is really nice. Like you go to church and hear, the mass and the gospels and, you sing the hymns, which is really nice and community based. And then at the end of church, there's often like a call to action, like we're raising money for this or we're, doing this. And I think that that's really beautiful. And I don't really know where else to get that. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's really important. I think that they do that really well. And I also just think like in a way, like I wish that like which I know that there are like college classes that do this, but I think that people really crave like deep readings of spiritual texts. And I think that we need like that for secular people or people who are not like affiliate because it's really nice to think about. I mean, like it's what we do with poetry, where like we read it and we're like, oh, what does this mean to me and stuff like that. And I think that taking it out of the context of like what people have told us these lines mean, I think it's really beautiful if you can just go and sit with something and think about what it means to you and how you want to in like that kind of goes back to like the way details are more powerful when they're specific. It's more powerful if you read something and you say, well, what does it mean to me? What is this? What do I think? And I think that we need to insert ourselves more into the interpretation of religious texts than we do, or we feel like maybe we can't, but like, which understandably, because if you were to do that, people might get mad. But like, but I do think that there's maybe people crave that a little bit.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible for poetry to be a substitute for that? I mean, like in your life, as Catholicism wanes and poetry waxes. Am I using those words right? Yeah. Um, did the one replace the other? Like, was poetry filling in that spiritual connection? I mean, poems are so similar to prayers, and it feels to me like poetry is a kind of prayer for secular people who have a spiritual gene or whatever it is, and yet don't relate to the major religions and all that bureaucracy. And do you think they relate in that way for you? Growing up through poetry and religion.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think it really filled that thing that I felt, especially where it feels like a whole. Like when you're really like, raised religious, whether or not you believe it from the beginning or not, it does feel like quite a whole because you're like, I think when I was younger, I always kind of felt like, well, I really hope that one day I really connect with this more or connect with something in the way that the other people seem to be, whether it's real or for show. Like you want to feel that because it seems like a very beautiful feeling. And the times where I do feel it, it's almost always reading poetry. Like someone will say something and I'm like, oh, and I think that goes back to like what is truth. Like someone will say something and it feels so intrinsically true. I'm like, oh my goodness. Like, okay, we are all connected because they've just said something that I would never have been able to articulate and feels like maybe a core belief of mine or a core like worry or something of mine. So yeah, I do think, and I think that also there's something about poetry, like if you think of poetry as a religion or, you know, you read all these things and you become more deeply entrenched in like the human condition, which is really, really beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think like we planned it. We got to read "Mass on the Beach" is the next poem, which is a newer poem, not from the book, but just appeared in Plume.
Yes. Mass on the beach. I'm trying not to wonder if the priest applied sunscreen to read this sermon about who knows what going on and on in the sticky heat. Nana's shawl falls from her shoulders. As usual, my thoughts unruly as seagulls and just as hungry for what isn't mine. I envy devotion, the foreplay of some higher unknowing, the promise of looking into a Bible to find that feeling. I watched the beautiful women bouncing around in bikinis. In the distance, jumping cheers from a volleyball tournament. The kite a kid can't get the wind to catch.
Yeah, it's a great image to end on there. A kite a kid can't get the wind to catch. It was Mass on the Beach by Lexi Pelle. And I noticed that you often do that, ending on a strong image like that. Is it something, like, how do you know a poem ends? Is that something that you, do you write toward that last image knowing that that's what it's going to be, or is that part of the editing process?
No, there's not one poem in the book where I've known what the ending was going to be. I don't think I've ever done that. No, I can't think of one poem where I knew the ending. But also, I think that would take away from the truth of it. I don't think it's wrong if you do it. I think you should do it and be willing to like have it loose, like have it as a possibility. If you do kind of think you know what the ending is, then maybe not hold on to it too tight because you don't want to end up forcing something into it. But no, I never know. I will say with this poem, I had a list of images in my head and in my notebook of like things associated with going to mass on like a mass on the beach. And I had the image of a kid and a kite. I didn't know what that would mean. I was just like, oh, like a kid flying a kite. And so I kind of knew that was an image that should probably go into the poem. But as the ending image, until I actually put it in the poem, I was like, oh, the poem's over. Like I've said this thing. But no, I didn't know that was going to be like, it was just this kind of very innocuous image. And I think that's what's kind of fun about imagery is it's often like staring you right in the face and you're like, oh, that's where it ends. Like that has happened to me a lot of times. Also with the nuns came by bus, that was another thing. Like I touched the button but didn't press. Like it was just something I like wrote offhandedly, like as something like kind of funny, and I didn't really think of it as an ending. It was just this line that I was like, oh, this is something that I did. And then I was like, oh, this is an image that means something to the rest of the poem. But yeah, I never know where the poems are going to end. I think it's not a very good practice to try to write toward an ending. I think it's fine if you end up having the ending that you anticipate, but I think you should not hold on too tightly to it.
It sort of ties into the question Dick Westheimer had. He says, your poems are so subtle in their sonic richness. How much do you let sound lead you through the poem? And so when we talk about image, we talk about metaphor, but sound is a big component too. So how much sound driven are your poems in the process?
Very much, because I think like when you're editing, like if something doesn't sound good, like I'm like, okay, there's probably like a word here that needs to be changed. So I am very interested in editing on a granular level. Like actually the last line of this poem, like the kite a kid can't get the wind to catch was like a kite some kid can't get the wind to catch, a kite the kid can't, like I kept playing with the articles and stuff. So every thing in a poem I think should be questioned. But yeah, I like subtle alliteration. That's kind of like one of my big things. I think it's really, really nice when it feels subtle. It doesn't feel like very in your face. It almost feels accidental. I'm very interested in that, and yeah, so I do think about sound a lot, and I do edit for sound. Um, but the best way to do that is to read your poems out loud and to hear it and be like, oh, that doesn't, because sometimes something will sound great in my head and I read it out loud and it comes out all garbled. I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound so great.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very interested in things sounding good.
Yeah. Well, we're almost up on time, but I wanted to ask about, circle back to Instagram, which you mentioned. There's something there, which we had an Instagram Poets issue, tried to explore what that was. And obviously there's a big market, for Instagram poetry. But then the question becomes like, what is Instagram poetry and is it the same thing? So I'm just wondering what your experience was with, trying to share poetry on Instagram, how much it worked and how much you feel like it can work, how do you feel about Instagram poetry?
So before I ever sent to like, I didn't know what a lit journal was for like the longest time. Like, I didn't know what that was. So I actually found out what a lit journal was from Instagram poetry because people are like, I was in a lit journal. I'm like, what's a lit journal? Um, and but yeah, I mean, I think it's hard for me. It wasn't sustainable. Because I used to just write and post on Instagram, and that was kind of how I got my start. And then I basically stopped because it's really, really hard to separate the creativity from like a very specific thing. And I think there are people who do it well, but I think it can be very hard because certain things and certain styles are what, and if it's not true to you, you're kind of just writing to get like a certain amount of likes or shares or engagement or stuff like that. So I think there's something kind of like, when you write a poem and you send it to a journal, you're not getting like a bunch of likes, and it's more like there's a little more space for you to trust that your poem can breathe. Whereas I feel like with Instagram, if you're not like a really strong-willed person that's very confident in your work and your message and your imagery, like it can feel very like, oh, that didn't do well, that's bad, even though like it could just not be the right poem for the platform or the right poem that people want. But yeah, I think it was wonderful for me because my entire writing career was like basically I learned about it on Instagram. People were like, lit journal. I'm like, what's a lit journal? And they were talking about publishers. And I was like, what, you can send to publishers. I didn't know any of it. So yeah. So I feel like weird. I don't want to say negatively. I just think you need a certain sort of demeanor to thrive there without like letting your vision kind of fall to the wayside.
Hmm. Well, it feels to me like, having explored that issue, and one of the first guests, I think she was on Rattlecast number 4, was Pavana Reddy, and she sort of lamented. I don't think she used the phrase audience capture. I don't think that was a phrase yet, but she was talking about how you end up writing to what your audience wants to hear, and that audience is sort of an affirmation in like a cute way of your existing feelings, and not like a complexification of that. And so there's weird branching between um, making the world more complicated and nuanced and difficult versus confirming and retelling the same thing. And I think it feels to me, what happens on Instagram is that like affirmation of like what I already, that's like, it speaks for me. It says what I wanted to say in words maybe I couldn't have articulated. And it doesn't like push the human imagination any farther, which I guess is the problem. But did you find any hints that it could be going farther? Is there any use to that? Because one of the things that I think about too, I always think about this one little comment that someone left once, like 5 years ago on Facebook. And it was just someone who said, this poem is so dark and depressing. This is why I stopped reading contemporary poetry, because it's just so dark. And in your poems and some other poets like Denise Duhamel, who we published her chapbook this year, there are a lot of fun in their poems too. But it is like not that common to have fun in poetry. So do you think there's a way to find a bigger audience by making poems more fun, given that you like to have fun with your poems?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people like I think poetry is a lot more like music than people think. Like there's a lot of genres within poetry. And what gets shared is kind of often a certain type of what goes viral or whatever. Like I think that there's often like one of my dreams, I talk about this all the time, is I would love to publish a poetry anthology called Not for Everyone. And it's just like a collection of like the weirdest, like, just funny, kind of like offbeat, quirky poems that are you know, maybe the message isn't about hope or the message. I love poems about hope and all those things, but I think that those are often what's anthologized. So people think that poetry is either really sad, it's about like the saddest thing they've ever heard of, or it's like this call to hope. And there's so much in between there. That's like saying there's like, I don't know, like rock and pop, and that's it. That's all the music there is in the whole world. And so I think that that's kind of a problem. And I think that it puts people off, and because they don't know that there's anything for them there. Like if you have a sense of humor, like, there's poets like Matthew Olsman who are, there's so many wonderful poets that do great things with humor. And I think that those aren't the poems that people know. Even poets that people love, like Marie Howe has like a poem about like the it's just a list of different men's penises, and it's hysterical. And it's like, but the people wouldn't know that based on like, What the Living Do, which is a beautiful poem. But like, I just think that there's something for not maybe not something for everyone, but there's something for more people than people realize.
Yeah. How much of that do you think about as you're writing poems? Like, are you trying to entertain yourself primarily, or like people like you, or trying to expand what people like beyond people like you? How much do you think about that as you write a poem?
No, I write only for myself. I write kind of for myself, and I usually have one audience member in mind, which is kind of strange. But like if I'm in a workshop and I'm like, okay, well, what would Ellen Bass like? Which it kind of sounds manipulative, but it's more like a prompt within a prompt. I'm like, okay, how can I write in this style since I have this person who's potentially going to give me feedback? So I would like, you know what I mean? So I kind of play with that a lot. And so, yeah, sometimes I'll write things like I'm like, I would really like to send it to this journal, and I noticed that they have this particular thing that I've never tried. So I'm going to try this, but within my style. And I never like go all like it would be very subtle, like, but it would just be something that maybe I haven't explored before. But yeah, I mean, I think that you don't want to go you don't want to care too much. I think you don't, because I think then you won't get to that truth if you're worried about it, because you'll think like, well, does this apply to everyone? And really what makes something true is if it's true to you, it probably is true to someone else. So yeah, I don't know. It's really, really tough.
Yeah. Well, we're about out of time. Do you want to finish out with one last poem?
Yes. This is, Did you know the Vatican is made of particle board? Something my stepfather said to see if my mother would believe it. She did. She's been to the Vatican. How blessed the basilica must be that some tourist's enthusiastic hand gestures never punctured its pillars. Bernini's Baroque canopy never collapsed by an old Catholic's fainting awe. A miracle the mosaics still marvelous despite centuries of storms. She was pissed when he laughed. Thought he wanted to make her seem stupid, gullible. I only believed you because I love you, she said weeks later when he repeated the story to his bandmates. Who doesn't want the world to be made of softer material? Who isn't waiting for truth to transubstantiate the hours spent scrubbing sticky spaghetti from the pot? Say the statue of David is Swiss cheese. Wouldn't you want to bite a sculpted thigh until beauty felt a little less unattainable? Stick a finger in the wound of truth, like Caravaggio's Thomas fishing around in Jesus' flesh. Tell me what you feel.
Yeah, and that was one of the last poems in the book. That was Did You Know the Vatican is Made of Particle Board by Lexi Pelle from her book, Let Go with the Lights On. Lexi, thanks so much for being a guest. It's been so much fun talking poetry with you and sharing this book, which is really fun to read. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. And it was Lexi Pelle once again. You can find her in Poetry Spawn all the time. She's had a whole bunch of poems recently. And also at her website, Lexi Pelle, that's LEXIPELLE.org. LexiPelle.org, find the book there. And now we're going to take a quick break and go to our prompt lines. And the prompt for this week is the following. Think of a time you traveled. Write a poem that reimagines that journey but set in a different time period. That's your prompt for this week. Think of a time you traveled. Write a poem that reimagines that journey set in a different time period. And to share your poem, and we're going to do it doesn't apply for this time, but we wanted to make a note. We're going to start doing only, since we have so much, the prompt lines ends up being longer than the regular show. And so we're going to focus on just this one prompt every week, and not prompts from last week's like we've been open to in the past. So to share poems about this prompt, and I didn't tell anybody ahead of time, so if you have a prompt from last week, that's fine too. But for now on, it's just prompts for this week to share your poem. And it's a one-page max as always. Email the poem right now to promptlines@rattle.com. That's promptlines@rattle.com, all one word. Email your poem so we can show it on screen like we did for Lexi's poems just now. And then find the Zoom link, which I'm about to deploy in YouTube and Facebook. Join the Zoom if you'd like to share a poem. if you just want to sit back and enjoy everybody else's poems, which I definitely enjoy myself, stay right where you are, because YouTube or Facebook or wherever you're watching is the best place, because then you can see the poems as the poets are reading them too. But if you have one to share, come on the Zoom and we'll be right back with more poetry. And we're back. Thanks so much for your patience. We got our prompt poems editor and associate editor, Katie Dozier, here.
I just want you to have to say two titles every time.
I know. I
haven't
figured out what we actually want to say.
I
and
know.
So I say that every time.
That's
now.
True. Regardless, I love that interview. I'm a big fan of Lexi Pelle and her poetry. She writes prompt poems sometimes too, so it's always a pleasure to get to read those.
Yeah, it definitely is. And let's see. So we have our big announcement of the prompt poet of the month.
Mm-hmm.
And so they couldn't be here.
Mm-hmm.
But the poet is, drumroll, please. You got a drum roll?
Drum. I can't do that part. I'm not prepared for this segment.
Kelly Bennett is the poet this month with all the fixing. So tell us about this poem and why you picked it.
Okay, so this poem to me is the prompt, the ode to write an ode to the thing that you're most grateful for, the first thing you thought of as being grateful. And first of all, I really love the title of this poem. So it's interesting, you were talking about titles with Lexi and how much emphasis she places on it. And one of my favorite kind of titles is the kind where it's like a George Bilguer poem, which I think he's maybe the best at, where you read the title and then by the end of the poem, the title is transformed. And it's such a wonderful way to feel satisfied from a poem, because you feel like you've grown just from that poem because those words mean something different to you. So I really like that. And then I like that it's somewhat humorous also. You guys know I'm a sucker for some humor. So
yeah, a good poem for this time of the year too.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So here we go. Let's play this. This is Kelly Bennett reading all the fixins. Here we go, and we'll actually play it. She sent an audio of it too. So here we go. Let me turn this on. Okay.
All the fixings. My grandmother saved the butts. The butt of every bread loaf went into the freezer for stuffing. One stale loaf makes 8 to 10 servings. Chicken, duck, and turkey butts were saved for stock. Onion and celery butts, too. Roasted, they result in richer flavor. When she passed, my grandmother's freezer was stuffed with hoar-frosted butts, awaiting the oft-promised return of prodigal family. Use a slurry of potato water and flour to thicken gravies and soup. The first time I left my children's father, I stuffed my trusty tank green Cadillac with kids and toys and their clothes. Kids go through clothes faster than grass grows. Fueled by fury, drove Route 66, the subject, if not the butt of song, Drove 1,673.9 kickless miles. Not looking pretty. Tulsa, Oklahoma to Amarillo, Gallup, New Mexico, San Bernardino, stopping only long enough to gas up and drive through. Burger Kings are spaced a meal apart. Kids' meal prizes change at the state line. Drove Freedom Boulevard to Oregon Street, straight into the long fuchsia line driveway. The ballerina flowers waved. So did she. My grandmother saved my butt, too.
Yeah, well, I love that poem. I love that the Burger Kings are spaced a meal apart, and also the fun of having butts all over the poem.
Yeah,
too.
it was fun. I mean, it was a very, it was almost hinged on being a braid, kind of with how it connected the two, through an unlikely source. And I also really enjoy, can you move to the line about the kids' clothes?
Yeah.
Kids go through clothes faster than grass grows is really a great. I can relate to that, sizing up the kids again in their clothing. So
Yeah, definitely. We definitely can.
Yeah.
Yeah. So wonderful. That's going to be Tuesday's poem of the day. That was our prompt poem of the month by Kelly Bennett, All the Fixins. So really fun poem there.
Yep.
So the prompt for this week, like we said, was let me pull it. It was think of a time you traveled, write a poem that reimagines that journey, but set in a different time period. So first of all, what were you thinking? Why did you do this prompt, and then how did you approach it?
Well, I really don't know this one came to me now because it feels like I made it forever ago, to be honest. But I thought it would be fun. We are lucky to live in an age where we have a lot of travel options. I mean, I have a car that can basically drive itself, which I appreciate. And so I thought it would be really interesting, and maybe a time for a little bit of gratitude if we look back, or a time to be angry we're not more forward if you went forward, I guess, maybe as well. So, yeah.
All right. So what'd you do with this poem?
I wrote a hyben.
There you go. So are you going to read it?
I am going to read it.
Okay.
Wave. Imagine our life a few centuries ago, if all we take for granted was ungranted. Missing you for months, I'd fold into a green velvet cloak, pin my hat to my topknot, and duck into a carriage that could only carry me about as fast as I could walk anyway, but with a clip-clip-clop. The weight of our brass latch being unlocked, the sizzling glitch of fireplaces, the beating of our bed being fluffed, another whip shocking us with the sorcery of our own senses. Then there's the part not altered by years or by false starts, how I miss you as you chasera into the next room, even when I'm in the next room, waiting. A mirror opposite a mirror.
Yeah, so I love that. I love the carriage going only as fast as I could walk anyway with a clip.
Yeah, because I Googled that. I was like, how fast does the carriage go? Because I was thinking, like, it's probably not that much faster, And the min speed was 2 miles an hour. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And so did you know it was going to be a hyben when you entered, or did you I just need to keep going with a hyben?
No, this was a situation where I always think about when I have a false start when I write a poem. Most of the time I sit down and I just write the poem, but sometimes I start writing a poem and then I realize that it is, as Bob Hickok said in that episode we did in the Poetry Space about the flow state, a flat stone. And so I throw that flat stone away and get back to one that's round. So I didn't know with this, and I didn't make the line breaks until after, actually, when I was writing it. So
yeah, well,
I just want to write in a carriage, though. Like, doesn't everybody want to write in a carriage?
Well, we should go to New York City and do one of those.
Carriages. It's because I just bought Charlotte a lamp in the shape of a carriage, and it came into the poem. I love how things do that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Well, for me, I did a hyben too.
Yeah.
Because
you knew I wrote a hyben because I showed it to you before the episode.
Well, not really.
No.
Because we've been reading all the hyben submissions.
I know, yeah.
For that spring issue, and talking to
Lou
Watts on
Watts.
I who was great. It's been a great interview for everybody.
It's really a great interview.
Yeah.
I'm the only person who's listened to it so far, and I enjoyed it.
So I just was in a hyben mood, and I probably couldn't think of any other way to write right now.
Well, I'm sure you could. Give yourself a little credit.
All right. And so mine is about, right now we're in our vacation cabin, we'll call it, in Wrightwood. And I think about this, I can't be here without thinking about the past, because for about 50 years in the 1800s, this town was, one farm. And the people who lived here were snowed in every winter by they got storms that were like 7 feet of snow. And it was just this one Wright brothers that lived out here. And the idea of that, and every time we like trot down, like we're gonna do tomorrow morning, and you just kind of scoot down in your little car, like it's nothing,
Yeah.
down to the valley where all the stuff is.
It's amazing.
I can't help but think about what that would have been like back then.
Not
you know?
this easy.
So that was my Hyben, and it's right here. I call it Going to Town, because that's what the Wright brothers did. Going to town. You gotta say it like that.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind.
A heap of pelts on the pack mule and baskets of apples, a gun for the grizzly and a pouch of the gold we panned in the cold. I kiss you hard on the pine of the porch. It's 2 days down through the canyon, 3 back up if I'm quick. I'll bring the beans, the flour, the sugar, the tea, some fabric and thread, and a coat you can mend. Through the winter, that's all that we'll need. Rush hour, every hour apart. So that is my Going to Town, Hyben.
That's great. I did mend your coat also.
I know, I
True
was thinking
fact.
about that too. Yeah, so that was the prompt, to go back in time like it was now.
Yeah.
So that was
that's really nice. Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
Going to town was the poem.
That was
Say
Going
it
to Town.
right.
So, and entering the second resident was Wyatt Earp. That is Wyatt Earp's cabin down there, by the way.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, that is my poem. Let's see what everybody else has, and let's go first to Brian O'Sullivan.
Hi.
Hey, Brian.
Hey, Brian. Yeah, we usually get to you later, so I figured we'd jump in and
I
get
know,
you
it's
sooner.
strange.
I know.
Thank you. Nice. Yeah, I too have a Hyben.
Yay!
It must be something about the topic. Called Derailment. I'm on the train from Bangkok to Chiang Mai on the night of my 42nd birthday. I'm there on a faculty study tour, and we spent the last couple of nights sleeping on the hard floors of the monastery run by Thailand's first female Buddhist monk. It was enlightening, but my back hurts, and there seems to be small blocks of cement suspended from my eyelids. And after an expensive plastic cup of cheap beer, I'm out. When I open my eyes, I'm lying in the mud in the jungle, and an elephant is peering down at me. I swear that she has a serenely bemused smile on her wizened face. I hope you weren't attached to the train, she says. They don't exist yet. Oh, and I hope you're not attached to time and space either. I grunt. I get that the elephant is being noble, but in truth, I'm still attached to my back. And if it hurt before, now it feels like a lightning-blasted tree stump 6 feet in front of me, on which the monk is seated with a monkey having tea. They smile and wave at the elephant and then at me. Alms walk, handful of starfruit, daybreak.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I love how the humor in the Hyben, or in the text part, contrasts with the seriousness of the haiku.
Yeah, me
It's a
too.
great use of that.
I love that little ping of that rhyme there at the end too. And you bring up a good point about how this prompt is well suited to being a Hyben, with it kind of asking for a travelogue, which of course is how a Hyben, how the Hyben form started out through Basho, which I'm very grateful for. So
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for sharing
Thank
that, Brian.
you.
Yeah,
Thank
pleasure
you.
as always. Yeah.
Great prop.
Yeah, it was Brian O'Sullivan with a Derailment. And let's go next to Rod Deasy.
Hi, good evening.
Hey,
Rod.
Rod.
Okay, and this poem didn't go quite where I was expecting it to go, but
Oh, those are the best.
anyway, there's an epigraph here. Past periods are like foreign countries. Lord David Cecil, from his inaugural lecture as Professor of English Literature in Oxford in 1949. And that's actually the guy who originated the saying that L.P. Hartley used at the beginning of his novel, The Go-Between. The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. Anyway, to the poem. Last journey home of the 60s. A small ripple of anxiety slid through the limpid pools of light on the late-night station platform. Midnight loomed, but the last train had yet to make an appearance. The peace and love of tree-lined streets, welcoming cafes and comfortable pubs, were swallowed by enveloping shadows. Those of us who waited stood stiffly apart, avoiding eye contact or conversation. The train whistled a mile away. It's one our eye staring down the track towards us. We breathed easier, shuffling our feet. We knew we'd soon be escaping. The darkened city no longer seemed so strange and mysterious. We floated into the safe cocoons of compartments and slumped nervelessly onto upholstered seats, oddly comforted by their familiar geometric pattern. We were soon soothed by the wheel's rhythm and the repetition of stations. The last train stopped at every one, disgorging a rider or a few at each. I fell asleep inside that bright bubble as it cruised through night-dark fields, past factory yards, through sleeping towns. I dreamed the train didn't stop at my station, but hurtled onward into the velvet darkness, accelerating towards a distant sliver of light, thin as a blade, faint as a promise. What dawn light greeted me? What metamorphosis? What motley wings did I bear?
Yeah, I love those questions at the end, and I was hoping we get some train poems because it's a good prompt for trains.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Rod.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Yeah, it was a Rod DC with Last Journey Home of the 60s. Let's go next to last month's prompt poet of the month, Hamid Malik.
Happy to be here on the Hyben show, because mine's a Hyben too.
Yay!
And this was really interesting, because my daughter's on her first trip overseas at the moment. She's 21. And so I was thinking about my first trip at the same age, and this is what I've written then. Daughter frames. I walk the concourse, breathless, 21. Each blink filing away first trip snapshots. My feet keep testing the ground as I try to get airborne out of them. One hand is tight on my too long handbag strap, and the other works to steer my fixed wheel suitcase. I pray in the back seat of the car, being driven by a man in a too big suit who had my cardboard name spelt right, but held slant. The lady at the marble desk calls me ma'am, and explains how I can call my mother from the phone in my room. My suitcase lies on a golden trolley with a gazebo on top. My mother's eyes dart on faraway streets I walk on her bedroom ceiling. My phone rings as soon as I press send. We've landed, Mum, just getting our luggage. I thought it was my blue bag, but a lady has the exact one, even the tag. I watch her, 21, move through the airport on my phone's satellite app until I see her baby photo icon emerge from the building. The ding makes me jump as the video of her walking the concourse arrives. I watch her baby face bob over the bumps on Jalan, Bandara, and Ngara Ray. I fumble to reopen the app, breathless, when it says cannot be located. But here she is now, 32 kilometers per hour on Sunset Road, passing Grand Lucky Supermarket. I take a screenshot of the roof she stops under 52 minutes later. I close my eyelids. My daughter walks between the edges of my phone.
I love that image at the end. Yeah, Daughter Frame is a good title for it too. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Hamid.
Thank you.
Thanks.
There was Hamid Malik with Daughter Frames.
Yeah, I didn't realize that I basically just cheated the way into another Hyben type prompt. It makes a good point.
Well, let's see. Let's go next to let's go to Siobhan, so it doesn't get too late.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Siobhan.
Hello.
Hi.
So my poem is based on the meeting I had with Nancy Tennell. She came to Paris, and then I went to meet her on Tuesday.
Oh, that's so
Yeah,
great.
I showed you the pictures. I know they were so
know.
sweet. They made me so happy to see those pictures of you two together.
Yes, and she doesn't know I've written this poem.
Oh, that's even sweeter.
So I just have a little bit of cultural information to give quickly. So I took Nancy and her husband LG to a museum called the Carnavalet Museum, which recounts the history of Paris. And it's in a very big mansion, which in the 17th century was the home of a lady called Madame de Sévigné, who is a well-known 17th century letter writer. Her letters were published, and those were letters to her daughter. And she also had a literary salon where she would invite well-known people of the day, including writers, and she knew the playwrights, including Racine. And in those days, well, Racine in any case, he wrote his poetry in verse, and the classic verse line in French is called the Alexandrine with 12 syllables. And the poem is called Nancy in the Metro. So, Nancy and LG, I've got metro tickets to take you to the Carnavalet Museum. What type of museum is it? The history of Paris, right from Neolithic times and when Paris was just a village on an island on the Seine, all the centuries. Shiny tiled corridors up and down stairs of the underground meanderings, people zipping past noisy tube trains, and up we come on the other side, but the sky is pink. Nancy and I look at each other aghast. We've got fancy ringlets, powdered faces, long bustled dresses, brocaded bodices, satin slippers, and oh, that corset. And LG's wearing a long wig of curls and breeches. Monsieur Dame, a coachman, invites us into a carriage with a clopety horse. The cream mansion is grandiose, high ceilings, sparkling chandeliers, warm wooden panelled walls, velvet. Madame de Tinel, how delightful to see you. Take a glass of wine. I know you're a lover of poetry, so there's a treat for you this evening. Monsieur Racine and his muse, Mademoiselle Duparc, are about to recite their divine Alexandrines from Andromaque. Do be seated. Je passais jusqu'au lieu où l'on garde mon fils, puisqu'une fois le jour vous souffrez que je vois, le seul bien qui me reste est d'Hector et de Troie. J'allais, Seigneur, pleurer un moment avec lui, je ne l'ai point encore embrassé d'aujourd'hui. Did you hear the Alexandrines, Nancy? Yes, 12 syllables, and I understood, I think, it was about seeing her son. That's right, Andromache's son, imprisoned by Pyrrhus. Since we are speaking of sons, Madame de Tinel, how are your twin boys? I hear they will present shortly at court. So fortunate you are that your sons are close. My daughter has repaired to Provence with her spouse, le Comte de Grignan. How I wish he had not taken her so far away. I write 3 letters per week to her, sometimes of 30 pages. LG nods towards the outdoors. It's getting dark. As we proceed out of the huge entrance into the narrow street, we're back in our trousers and walking shoes. Powder and flounces disappeared, cars honking. It was very nice, but phew, Nancy says. Yes, I agree. I've got metro tickets to get back to your hotel. Oh, strange things happen in the metro. I'd rather call an Uber. I need to give the street where we are. It's Carnavalet Museum, Rue Madame de Sévigné, the famed 17th century letter writer, you know.
Oh, I love the details now. That's so fun.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Siobhan.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll tell Nancy that I've written it.
Yes.
Well, that was just really so fun to have, just to know that you guys met up in Paris.
I want to go to
amazing.
Paris just to meet up with you.
I know, me too. Well, let's do
Of
it.
course.
Let's do it.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you very
Siobhan.
much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye. It was Siobhan Brownlee with Nancy in the Metro. And let's go next to Nivedita, also to make sure she can get back to work in time.
Hi, Tim. Hi, Katie.
Hi.
How are you guys doing?
Nivi, great to see you.
It's good to be here.
So where did you take this prompt?
I took it to two places, which may be a bit of cheating, but I couldn't help myself. So one was a boat journey down a river,
Mm-hmm.
which I've been on many, but I just chose any river basically. And the second one is sort of a half dream, which was also surprisingly a boat journey. So both were boat journeys, but just two different destinations.
Well, that's
And
totally
I
fair.
set it. Oh, that's cool. Thanks, Katie. And I set it in the ancient past, but sort of in a very mythical kind of realm, not something that actually exists, but in the mythical past.
Hmm.
And I didn't go the Highborn route. I was very much contemplating it, but then
All right, well, let's hear it, Nivi.
crossing the river of lanterns. The boatman rows with oar and silence, each pull a slow tear in the water's face. Lanterns float downstream, small fires cradled in paper skins. Mist curls like breath from an unseen mouth. I watch my past selves on the far bank, child with a reed flute, woman weaving stories into cloth. The night smells of cedar and rain. The stars hung like herbs to dry. I ask the boatman his name. He answers with the cry of a heron. At the shore, I step onto soft earth, but my footprints leave no mark.
Hmm.
Yeah, I love all the dreamy details. in
Yeah,
that.
it is very dreamy.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Nivi.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
It was lovely being here.
Thanks.
Have a good evening.
Yep, have a good day.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was Nivi DeKarthik with Crossing the River of Lanterns. Let's go next to Mike Bales.
I liked your poet tonight.
Oh, thanks, Mike.
There are some poets that stand out more to me, and I think she was pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at this again, I feel like I'm time traveling a little bit like Doctor Who. I used to watch that a lot.
Yeah, I never have, actually.
Me either. Everybody tells me I'd like it, and I've never watched it.
I
It's
know.
one of
Maybe we
those
should
shows
try
for me.
in
Yeah.
about 5 years when
When
we're done
we-
with The Sopranos.
Yeah, that's how long it's going to take.
Until I was without a TV and that was before Saturday nights of karaoke. That always has to enter the equation. I get carried away. I emailed it to you. I got a response, so I think you should have
Yep,
it.
we got it right here, Mike.
Without the heading, it's a little bit less than one page. It's called My Mother's Side. The interstate is no longer a highway. The highway is now a gravel road. The gravel road now a field of oats rustling in a breeze. In its midst, a shimmering lake. As my grandparents stand in front of their house, I can tell they're proud. I'm meeting them during a time before I was born. As they stand in front of their house, I can tell they're proud. My grandparents are talking about the old country, but now they're making a homestead in Minnesota. The farms are small, the dreams are large. As they go to bed after supper and look out their window, they go to bed after supper and look out their window at an intimate dark sky. They say all's good after a day's work. Years later, they showed me a grainy photo of them standing in front of the house. That should be my mother. Years later, my mother showed me a grainy photo of them standing in front of their house. When she is worried or sad, she said she wanted to take me back. I've grown up, I said, I can't. My thoughts turned to interstates built with pride and carved through rural land. As a child, I was fascinated when the president promised that we would be able to drive glistening strips of concrete from New York City to Los Angeles without a single stop at a traffic light. But for now that my mother's gone, I know life is found off the road.
I really like how directly you went back in time at the beginning of the poem. I think that was really well done.
Huh, thanks.
Very cool. Thanks, Mike.
Doctor Who. Okay, thanks.
I think that was Mike Bales with My Mother's Side. And next, let's go to a first-time caller. I believe Brian Abbott is here. Oh, Brian. I think Brian's saying they're just listening. Well, yeah, no problem. Yeah, we can't hear. All right. Okay. Well, we'll try back again, Brian. I'm not sure. We can't hear anything right now. If you want to read a poem, then yeah, like we'll swing back or leave a chat message or something like that. Okay. I was just listening. Okay.
The best place just listen is on YouTube, Brian, but we are happy you're with us.
It definitely is. Yeah. No need to go into Zoom if you just want to listen.
Yeah.
Because
you can see the poems there very nicely on YouTube.
Yeah. All right. So let's go next instead to Dick Westheimer, although I can't click the button. Dick, unmute yourself and appear.
All done.
Hey,
Hi.
Dick, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I echo I love interviews where the poet has this like real clear sense of poetics and has a way of explaining it that motivates me to be a better poet. So I really appreciated that about Lexi.
Yeah, definitely too.
I had a real trouble with this prompt, and I think it's because whenever I try to write anything that approaches fiction, it is just lame as lame can be. And it has that fictional element. So I just decided I had to start writing and see where the poem transported me. And Katie, I'd like an adjudication right here on this call. No need to humor me. Just tell me if you think that it sort of cheated too much on the prompt. Because
Okay, great.
I know.
I would love to be able to say, yes, I think it cheated so much. I think I'm too lenient. So this is my golden opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah. Go. You have my full permission to say, yeah, I wouldn't submit that one. It really isn't true to the prompt. So
Great.
go for it. No need to indulge me here. So I'll go ahead and read.
Okay.
Traveling the infinite distance between here and a fourth state of matter. My wife has big travel plans. Today she talks about Tuscany. Friday she checked out tickets to Fairbanks to see the Northern Lights. She asks if I want to go, but knows my destinations are closer to home, and yet so remote that no plane or bus or train can take me. I've told her of the time I walked out back in 78 when it was 25 below. I tried to pee to see if it would freeze before it hit the snow. There I was, young and living alone and peeing in the cold with no one inside my home to hug and nothing to hold besides a warm mug filled with chamomile tea next to a hot fire and a cast iron stove and no TV and a hi-fi stereo playing Linda Ronstadt singing Heart Like a Wheel. And after the pea-seethed snow settled, my breath slows to the tempo of sap in the winter-bound trees. Suddenly, I heard nothing. No cars were out on the main road, and silence became a fourth state of matter, more solid than ice, as visible as frost-fogged air. I said to my wife, to walk outside again into that. And she smiled. Her euphonium smile was a Star Trek transporter beaming me to the time before she'd sat by the wood stove in our shaker-caned chair, mug steam eddying the air, to greet me when I came in from the snow. And despite the tinsiness of it all, I return to that fourth state silence, which will keep me company while she's on her way to Fairbanks and I'm at home writing poems about how the house mutters and hums when I'm alone.
Mm.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, I don't know. What's your ruling, Katie?
Okay, my ruling is that because you sold us on how far you went back with the cast iron stove and the no TV, it passes. I would suggest submitting.
Well, that's just because I'm an old person. That's
an advantage you had going in. We can't help that.
Well, to me, I mean, of course, I'm not the editor, but it seems like no contest to me. It's a taking it an interesting place.
Yeah, you think it is?
Mm-hmm. I think so.
Well, okay.
I love that silence is the fourth state of matter. I think that's really cool.
Great
title. Cool place to go.
Yeah, definitely is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great. Okay, I'll take that as I'll submit it and see what happens.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Dick. I always appreciate you.
I appreciate you so much.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yep, take
Bye.
care. There's Dick Westheimer with Traveling the Infinite Distance Between Here and a Fourth State of Matter. All right, let's go to Chelsea McGlynn.
Hello. Hi, Chelsea.
Hey, Chelsea.
So, I kept on editing this as everyone was reading. So there's some changes. Sent you 2 emails, but that second email is still incorrect. But don't worry about it.
No problem. I've got the take 2. We're good.
Yes. So I'm writing about when I went to Machu Picchu back in 2009. And we actually got trapped there an extra day because of protesters who blocked off the train tracks, which is basically the only way in or out of the town next to Machu Picchu.
Oh, wow.
So it's called Taking the Late Train. Tired men with handmade signs block the trains from leaving Aguas Calientes back to Cusco. We scramble through the ruins of Machu Picchu again, take the waters and relax at the hot springs again. Sip our café con leches and ask our waitress in clumsy Spanish, ¿por qué? She answers us, agua. Water is what they're fighting for. Before the train tracks were laid, your own 2 legs were the only way to travel here. And still today, there are no roads to Aguas Calientes. We could walk back to Cusco on the Inca Trail, those steps cut out of sheer cliffs, only as wide as a llama's haunches. I touched the same stone stairs the last Incan emperor walked before Pizarro captured and sentenced him to death. The Catholic priest sent to take confession asked Emperor Atahualpa if he had ever been baptized, which translated to bathed in the sacred waters. Yes, yes, he said, all water is sacred. So they strangled him instead of burning, in respect of his final Catholic wishes. We do not walk home on the Inca Trail, merely wait at the bar for the police with submachine guns to clear the train tracks, and ask the bartenders making our pisco sours to hold the ice.
Very cool. And is that your own photo in Machu Picchu?
No, that is not my photo because I dropped my phone in a river.
Oh, no.
And lost most of my photos of Machu Picchu. But that is a picture of Agua Calientes. So you can see that there's roads, but there's no cars. It's just train tracks, and you just walk everywhere, basically.
Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah, that's one place I'd really love to go, is Machu Picchu. Yeah.
It's definitely worth it.
Yeah. Well, very cool. Well, thanks for taking us there through poems, Chelsea.
Welcome.
Awesome. Thanks. It was Chelsea McGlynn with Taking the Late Train. And next, let's go to Lisa Seidenberg.
Hi there.
Hey, Lisa. Great to see you.
It's been a few months.
Yeah. Has it been that long, really? I don't think so. I object. I think it's only been a couple weeks.
Okay. Well, I follow the Critique of the Week and talk a lot. I actually also have been traveling the last couple of weeks. My daughter lives in London and among other places. So we ended up there where she ran a half marathon. So I didn't, but I watched it. And so I wrote a triolet. I'm sorry it's from last week's prompt, but you said we could
That's totally good for this week. That's great. I'm glad to get one in so that we're living up to how we've been doing the show before for one last time. So that's great.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no problem.
Mention again how you can't do it anymore.
Just starting next week. You're totally good.
Yeah.
And it's short.
Yeah, it's really fun to have all in one topic.
Yeah, it is.
But it's been cool to be able to move around too as we have. So trade-offs.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add, I really had fun writing the triolet. I never did one before. I hope you do more.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it was. I thought it would be difficult, and then it was fun to get into it.
Oh, that's cool to hear. Yeah.
So it's watching my daughter run a half marathon. She runs along rivers, sprints on concrete, a soaring falcon on a long-distance path. The earth a treadmill beneath her feet, hardly a pause to drink or eat. She runs along rivers, sprints on concrete, limbs springing to a metronome beat, every mile and seconds in precision mapped. She runs along rivers, sprints on concrete, a soaring falcon on a long-distance path.
Oh, that's great. And I love the way that the triolets are so fun to listen to.
Yeah, they really are.
There's great sounds and all that repetition.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. There was Lisa Seidenberg was watching my daughter run a half marathon. And Jared Campbell in chat just mentioned this, but it's so hard to write a poem in 1 week.
It doesn't seem too hard for Jared. He writes pretty good ones.
First of all, it does not. But second of all, we just have to keep limiting things because we can't have the shows be like
BB,
5
it's going to be the whole week eventually.
I know.
It will run right into Critique of the Week.
Yeah, but there's always, the whole point is we write lots of poems as a group and, publish
there are
them all
trade-offs,
over.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right, well, let's go next, speaking of the devil, to Jared Campbell. Why not?
Hello.
Hey,
Hi,
Jared.
Yep.
So what do you got for us this week?
Come down to the river.
Okay, I've got it right here whenever you're ready.
When corn is grown up level with your eye, when air is thick and sickeningly sweet with corn sweat, which enthralls the midday heat that pushes up the mounting dragonfly who holds 1,000 cornfields in his eye, each slowly shivering leaf and stalk discreet, come out of the corn. Mud sucking at your feet, come down to the river where catfish fry. Come down to what has always been the source of everything that grows, the thing that's bluer than the sky. 3 quick cuts, pull off the skin, throw guts inside the thing that flows. Come down to where the catfish fry. You linger in the apathetic sigh of what is past and what is not yet born, and what is likely hiding in the corn. When what is green and gold turns brown and dry, the field won't hear your obsolescent why. You hear the leaves? They're whispering their scorn for those who stand mud-stuck inside the corn. Come down to the river where catfish fry. Come down to what has always been the source of everything that grows, the thing that's bluer than the sky. 3 quick cuts, pull off the skin, throw guts inside the thing that flows. Come down to where the catfish fry.
Yeah, that was great. I love the refrains in that. Jared, is there a name for the form, or is that just a knots form?
So this is a double Petrarchan sonnet, but we've been doing so much thinking about triolets and villanelles and other forms that rely on refrains. So what I did is I used the sestet as a chorus.
That's really neat.
Well, very cool form. Yeah. I mean, the music of that was just wonderful.
Lovely to hear iambic
both with
read
the
out
meter
loud.
and the repetitions. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really nice.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks, Jared. It was Jared Campbell with "Come Down to the River." And next, let's go to Laura Berg.
Hi.
Hey,
Laura.
Well, okay, because Katie, what I heard you say something, and I didn't take the time to actually read the prompt. And what I thought I understood was that you went sometime in the future. You go back to a place where you've been before. So I was I got very confused because that was complicated.
Well, that's a journey in and of itself.
That'll turn into an interesting interpretation, I think.
Yeah.
So then this poem's still a work in progress in any case, but I did go back to my hometown and I was surprised at how little it had changed. So I was thinking about that when I wrote it, but I'm still working on it.
All right, let's hear it.
Okay, flying into amber. If years from now I were to fly into my hometown, I'd want not to get stuck. Still the maple banisters, and the river would still lap in modest falls past one trophy building on either bank, not very tall. Still those tugging distinctions between neighborhoods, streets salted or not. Children climbing into the yellow bus, teens fleeing by Greyhound to New York City, elders descending into graves at Mount Hope. Still scholars would hang their coats in the Ethical Society's foyer, and poets inhabit a snowbound quad like ancestral horned larks encased in permafrost. There in the drafty theater I might still be sitting by mother, clinging to hat and muff as the concertmaster raises his bow and cattails unfurl across vast swamps, nature of a kind that rarely encircles cities anymore, because this city of my childhood doesn't grow up.
Yeah, very nice. Love the ending there.
I love the cattails. How wonderful are cattails?
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. Really cool interpretation of the prompt, too. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks.
It was Laura Berg with Flying into Amber. And let's go next to another first-time caller. Julian Plowden is here.
Yes. Oh, I didn't know I was next. I didn't know the order. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you great, and there's no specific order. We just kind of randomly pluck through
Oh, okay.
poets.
Okay.
So yeah, it's great to have you here. Where are you calling from, first of all?
Columbus, Georgia.
Cool.
Mm-hmm. I took a poetry dissection class because they offered it at Columbus State University. And it was really informative because I wrote before, but I'd never taken an actual dissection class, and it was really rewarding. So it improved my poetry overall, but I interpreted the prompt. I had a poem where it's about taking a long trip, but it's more like kind of abstract, multidimensional. So it's a little bit about like time traveling and applying the journey to like multiple scenarios.
Great.
Yeah, that sounds cool. Well, we love the prompts wherever they take your imagination. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. I did send it to you. I didn't have it on a page, but I did send it.
Yep, I've got it right here. So yeah, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay, so the working title right now is a time traveling vow. Okay. So it goes, yesterday I caught up with tomorrow, which would be today. But you were not there still, and I could not make you stay. So today I finally found you, but you were trying to escape back to where you came from and show me the way. Tomorrow I will catch you right before you leave, back to today, and today's a mystery. So tomorrow is yesterday, and I'm running out of time to bring you back to now and when you are mine. I may not know the future or what the future holds, but yesterday I held you, and I'd like to keep that mold. Yesterday escaped me out of the window. Well, that was fun. It was.
Very cool thing. I love the convoluted way that poem unfolds with the time. It reminds me of, I can't remember the movie. There's this movie I really want to watch with my son. That's a rewatch because I saw it before where you can't tell like when's when. There's so many time travel going on. And anyway, very cool poem. I love that the sort of mental knot that builds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hope you come back soon. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, that was Julian Plowden with the working title was I can't remember. Can't find it. Yeah, but thanks so much for sharing that.
Time traveling was in the title.
Time traveling vowel.
There we go. Yeah, thanks so much, Julian.
Thanks.
All right, and next up, let's go to Christiana Doucette, who has some camera issues before, but I see they're fixed now.
I fixed it. I don't know. I just restarted because my internet kept kicking off, and I don't know.
Yeah, I can't tell you how often that happens, and that's the case. I mean, just like something's not right, restart the computer.
Yeah.
And then it works.
So I missed part of Jared's poem. I'm gonna have to go back and catch that tomorrow.
Yeah, well, it was a good one, but I'm sure this was a good one too. What do you got for us today, Christiana?
Yeah. So, Dick Westheimer mentioned like possibly like twisting the prompt, and I think I might be doing the same thing, but like not going as far back in history. I took it this year. My grandmother was diagnosed with cancer, and so she's going through chemo treatment. And so I think that's just been on my mind, and it came out in this poem as I was writing, like just associating with how part of the journey that we would usually take is currently not available. I-40's been washed out by Helene and isn't supposed to be back until like early 2025. And so it's a little bit more serious poem tonight.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, well, let's hear it.
This is Where the Stars Burn, Grandma's Chemo at Christmas. Any other year, we'd take I-40's curve where the road hugs the mountains in a wide swerve, while below, the Pigeon River sparkles silver tinsel, brimful of gems like day threw star glitter in the gorge and left it there till night, and blue satin reached for its diamonds again. We'd forge between the Blue Ridge along the mountain bridge between north and south, the quickest route to Grandma and cardamom rolls, to ice-fished lakes, sledding knolls, and everyone together for a week. Any other year, Grandma's kitchen would reek of yeast and spices, mint lamb roast, toasted marshmallows melting. My mother, her sister, and I would bend over tumbling letters, mind-boggling words pulled sideways, tangled in on top of each other. When I was a baby, their brother left them breathless over Christmas, his thin teen frame too fragile for a new year. They untangle words and memories, list them on paper, checking what they've missed. This year, the river tore apart the mountains. Out of stately filigree, a fountain heaved the broken heavens open, wrenching the roadway from its neck, dyeing the silver red with lumps of thick clay. We cannot say how it will end. Around the bend is too far to see whether the thin band of road will pull us sideways and drop us. Our hearts tangle each other, unwilling to let go. Mind-boggling words wrap labels we cannot make out. And the kitchen must be quiet while Grandma's blue veins pulse burning stars. This Christmas is ours. We are not promised another. We cannot take the old ways there and back. We only have these honest hours awake, alive, together.
Yeah, really strong poem for the holidays. Yeah, thanks so
Yeah.
much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And there was Christiane Doucette with Where the Stars Burn, Grandma's Chemo at Christmas. And great internal rhymes in that one, too. Next, let's go to Stephen Croft.
Hello.
Hey, Stephen. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks. I think that my poem may make the most sense to those who happen to have seen Mel Gibson's movie Apocalypto. This is called Ghosts at Chichen Itza. On a day of high sun and bright bird songs and jungle trees, I am at the edge of the well of sacrifice, a lake in a crevice of limestone hills. Wait by it as the guide's voice fades, leads the group back down the causeway, set to dreaming by her strange story of crop failure, drought, war, how living bodies fell here, their blood released by priests, clouding an underworld of blue water so the carved stone hands of gods might lift to grace again an anxious people. I watched the death walk slap of sandals up to the end of life, a day just like today, the splash feeding of souls to water, lulled maybe by the rhythmic priest chant, bowls of drugged liquid put to quivering lips by fervid servants. How in their steps to the priests they dream rains have come. The war against the city ended mid-step. How they might lift eyes in a shuffling line that idles at the murmured news. How they are let go, running for the kiss of family, carried hearts burning like the liquor from agave plants.
What a last line there. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Stephen.
Yeah, I'd like to say about the last line, I had in mind the body carrying the heart, but also the Mesoamericans, the Aztecs, and the Mayans were skilled at cutting the actual human heart out during sacrifice. And since these are ghosts, it may be that they are actually carrying their own hearts as they run.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for sharing that, Stephen. Yeah,
Thank
interesting.
you.
Yep. Yeah, take care. That was Stephen Croft with Ghosts of Chichen Itza. And next, let's go to Zachary Honeycutt.
Hey, Tim. Hey, Katie.
Hey, Zachary.
Hey. I'm happy to say that the poem The Man Called Cold has now become a Warp 10 poem.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Thank you. Yeah, so I was going to read the end, but you guys can all read it now on Warp 10 whenever you want. It's up there. Yeah.
Very cool. And what's the website for that? That's the one that's the science fiction poetry based thing, right?
Yeah, just type in Warp 10 magazine and it should come up, as long as the Warp 10 for Star Trek doesn't come up, because sometimes that comes up. Yeah.
Well,
Oh,
very
that's
cool.
great. Way to go.
Yeah. Well, it looks like you got a triolet for us.
Yay! You rose to the challenge. Way to go.
I do, because you asked me to. You
Aw,
asked me to.
thanks.
This will be my last rendezvous doing the last week's poem. Yeah.
Oh, we're gonna miss it though too. It's with a heavy heart.
It is. You got to catch up sometime.
I know.
I mean, if you do like the last week's poem every week, it's like you're writing a new poem every week. It's just you're 1 week behind. So
yeah,
I believe in you.
I'm excited. I'm excited for the challenge. I think it'll be
great, Zachary. Thanks.
All right. Well, let's hear this triolet.
Okay, I will. Oh, and let me just say one more thing. Very serious, Katie and Tim. If you guys ever publish this in the future, you completely have my permission to use Roderick DC's audio to read this, because I think it would be made for him, tailor-made. Yeah.
That is a wonderful policy for like any poem almost to do. I love his voice. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. The murder. Judge us not for the way we appear. In light of your darkness to our fuss, we sound our cause when danger's near. Judge us for the way we appear. We sear winter came before you to someone who was kind to us. So judge us for the way we mourn atop the wire, our bird raucous.
Very nice.
Oh, that's great. I love the way you shifted around the refrains. That was really nice.
Yeah,
Thank
very
you,
fun
guys.
fact. Yeah, thanks
thank
for
you,
sharing.
guys. Yeah, a great night tonight. Great poems. See you guys next week.
Thanks.
Awesome,
See you
thanks.
next
Yep.
week with next week's poem. You're gonna have it.
Yes.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Thanks, Zach.
Bye.
Yeah, there was Zachary Honeycutt with The Murder. All right, and next let's go to Jeremy McKay.
Hi, Katie. Hi, Tim.
Hey,
Hi, Jeremy.
Hey, that was a good talk. I like that. What was her name? Pelle?
Lexi Pelle, yeah.
Lexi Pelle, very inspiring. Very uplifting.
Yeah, great. So what do you got for us?
Sure. Yeah, I do a lot. I've been doing a lot of cross-country travel from San Diego to Maine.
That is cross country. That's as cross as you get. That's true.
and we do it in about 4 days. We've been doing it like once every 2 years. So we're up again for the summer. So we should do it in the fall, different times. And so I thought that was interesting. And I don't fly because there's things I like about driving.
Yeah.
And this poem is kind of about that. It's short. It's about if I wasn't driving, actually. So, anyway. Oh, I guess I have to bring it up, otherwise I'll never be able to read it. Okay. When tea becomes tea, I have a quote from Charles Kuralt on there. Kuralt. Thanks to the interstate highway system, it is now possible to travel across the country from coast to coast without seeing anything.
That's a great quote.
That is a great quote. Yeah.
It is a great quote. Yeah. So when teleportation becomes transportation, I will miss the billboard. I will miss the billboards for the Uranus Fudge Factory, even though I never stopped there. When teleportation becomes transportation, I will miss just driving through a mountain pass, the dizzying hairpin turns on my way to visit Nana and my mare. When teleportation becomes transportation, there will be no unplanned stops at Circus or chili dogs from drive-ins between here and there. When teleportation becomes transportation, a cross-country trip to Mom's will be a blink, no time to think and rethink what I want to say. When teleportation becomes transportation, will I still drive cross-country, or just say I will every time I dematerialize?
That's great. Very fun.
Yeah, that is
and
fun.
Great point there, too. I love road trips.
Yeah, I have this app on my phone that shows me really weird places that are like by the side. So we see like giant random golf balls and trucks on sticks and weird things that I love.
That is very fun. Yeah.
I would teleport though. Gotta be honest.
Well, back and forth from Texas and here.
I just don't like driving. Yeah.
But I drive to Maine though. Let's do it.
Yeah. Well, I'll do that with you. Sure.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Jeremy. That was
Thanks.
fun. All right. Yep. It was Jeremy McKay with When Tea Becomes Tea. And let's see. Tina Denniclaw is next.
All right. I got to unmute myself this time.
Good job. Hey, Tina. How you doing?
Yes. So happy about that. So I have a publication alert.
Oh, great.
But so it's actually, I submitted it Friday because they don't do simultaneous submissions, but I submitted it to something that gives you immediate responses.
Mm-hmm.
So any rate, it's the celebration, ode to celebration.
Oh, cool. Congratulations.
Great.
Where is it going to be published?
Yeah, so it's out of the School of Medicine, Arnold and Marie Schwartz School of Medicine in New York.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's Ithaca or someplace else, but yeah, they have a lot of different sections, and most of them take like up to 10 weeks to respond. But under the more voices, if you write to a specific theme,
Mhm.
they look at it immediately
Mhm.
and they give you a response immediately. So this is my second one.
No, very
The
cool, and
first-
a wider audience with a
Yeah,
space
that's
like
neat.
that. That's one thing we
Right.
want to try to do more,
Oh.
but never do. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up the link in the Rattle prompts lines on the so you guys can see that because it's nice to get a little pick me up.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and they are really appreciative. Way back in 1992, I had my very first research paper published. Somebody from the Arnold and Marie Schwartz School of Medicine wrote to me and asked for a reprint.
Mhm.
So this lady I'm talking to has no idea, but in my mind, I have a relationship with these people. And I would really like to support everything that they do.
Mhm.
And there's a trick to it. My first one, they didn't make me change. They don't want poems in this more voices. And this time they made me change. But they accepted my very first effort, what I was comfortable doing. So it's not written as a poem
Mhm.
itself. Because otherwise I'd have to wait till March or something to hear.
Oh, very cool. Well, what do you have for us for the time travel this week?
All right. So I thought about going back in time
Mhm.
and writing about, the buzzing around when you're riding a horse. There's always some insects. But at any rate, I decided I wasn't imaginative enough to have a whole long trip to Mount Lassen from here. That would take a few days. So I did it from TARS,
Mhm.
is the intrepid, wisecracking robot from the movie Interstellar.
I still
So,
haven't seen that. I need to see that one.
No, watch it.
It's a good movie. Yeah, it bends your mind just a little bit because it doesn't tell you exactly what's going on. But I'm giving TARS the ability to time travel.
All right. Well, let's hear it.
So TARS, remember the trip to Mount Lassen? How could I forget? Take us on that trip again. Shall I start where you walked into your husband's lab and dragged him away? Let's start at the lake. Before or after you insist that he get out of the car? After. Oh, the moment he saw ants on the ground. Enough teasing, TARS. He wanted to look at them. Click, click. You two walked a dirt path past 3 tiers of old stone seats. We sat on weathered white deadwood log and watched 2 people canoe a silent lake. Your husband told them where to find the grass-laden theater. That's the moment he relaxed into quiet. Shall we start there? No. Let's start at the ants. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all right.
no.
Yeah. Well, I love that last line. Let's start at the end. It's a very
Mhm.
memorable line there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, it really happened. His PI, he was a graduate student then, and and we really had a whole lot more time together since he was no longer working, as a graduate student. But as postdoc, still, I expected more time with him. So I showed up and dragged him out. And then his PI, he would mention it every once in a while over the years when I showed up and dragged him out. So apparently it was memorable.
Well, thanks so much for sharing that poem, Tina.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was Tina Dennett-Claw with a trip by time travel. And now, let's see. So coming up, let's see if we have we probably do, because I saw Ted Bernal Guevara. Yep, we got a poem by Ted. And he's got a photo here, like he always does. And the photo is this. It says True Feel. It's a picture of a smiling woman.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and let's see what we got for the poem. Character of Mine. Modern aviation wasn't around yet, but something took me to this ochre, scarlet, and green palette of a scene, to this chair of moods I could sit and reflect. I know she would have been alive, my grandmother of Spanish virtue and descent, not of Cozumel or Manila, but of Spain, the true origin of Española and daggers on the back of monstrous bulls. Yes, that was her personality. My grandfather would have been up in the crowd, among the spectators, admiring the first female matador in Barcelona. He caught her eye, and my grandmother flipped him the bird. Maybe the first screw you. Why are you staring at me? Gesture in Spain. Maybe the world. She was shy and gritty before the dishes of delectable Filipino cuisine ever came out of her. My grandfather sat and peered on, dainty in that skinny body of his, a zygotic beginning of mine. Yes, definitely. My grandmother had joked that when the wind blew, his legs were like hot stilts. In that baggy pants of his, something roared above, no passenger jet yet steaming above the arena. If it did, it would have been the TWA plane hoisting me to America. I was still shopping for my temper, and it was filleting through spinal cords down below. Grandfather was expanding his mind, taking intermediates at a local college. My mind was evolving in its midst, my temperament, mi corazón ardiente, and my lovely grandmother. I love that journey, the character of mine through the family history. Thanks so much for sharing that, Ted. That was Ted Bernal Guevara, of course, with Character of Mine. Look at the photo. It said True Feel. Interesting. All right. And that's going to wrap up the show. Let's go to the Sciku for this week. And the Sciku is based on this story, if I can redirect and stuff. It is from EPFL, which is like it's a public research organization in Sweden, actually. And the article is this: bird-inspired drone can jump. Oops, hang on. Can jump for takeoff.
Aren't all drones bird-inspired?
Well, this is especially bird-inspired because look at this. It's got two little bird feet.
Oh,
and it can
feet,
walk,
so
and it can hop, and it can take off like a bird does by hopping and jumping.
I wish it could chirp, but
and, anyway, to make it as light as a bird was kind of a challenge, and then to use that, and so they're thinking maybe for delivery of packages and stuff in between weird places, you might want to have to hop and stuff. So it's neat to have these little bird-like legs. If we could watch the video, I think we won't, but it's kind of, they call it the Raven. And so they use that bird-inspired way of locomotion. They wanted to have something that could pop, walk, and fly, which is a first. The research was published in Nature about doing this with a bird drone. And so the Sciku based on that is this. Home as the crow flies in a headwind. Home as the crow flies in a headwind. That is your Sciku for the week, and that is the show for this week. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. It's been a lot of fun with Lexi Pelle, the guest. Lots of great poems on the prompt lines. And next week's prompt, what's it going to be, Katie?
It's going to be you scrolling down to
Okay.
Okay, I realize I want to say first, this is a little similar to last week's prompt, but I'm really thinking about, it being close to the holidays, where everyone's head is and where mine goes during this time of year. And I think it'll be an opportunity for all of us to remanage our headspace, maybe. Anyway, so the prompt is, Recall a time that you acted poorly during winter and write a poem that crafts a different resolution to the incident. So I'm excited to see. I don't have a bad thing that I did in mind, but I've done plenty of them, so I'm sure one of them will spring up.
Well, it's interesting. Usually I have no idea what I'm going to write about, but this, as soon as I saw this prompt, I was
Really?
like, oh, that's what I'm going to write
You're
about.
turning into me.
I guess so. Because I do. I have something I a little regret. It's not a big incident.
Yeah.
But it's an incident that I'll write about, probably.
Well, I'm very interested. And then I also just wanted to mention that on the Poetry Space this week, we talked about AI. And for fans of Dick Westheimer, who's on the squad and part of that show, I think one of the most interesting aspects of that episode was Dick took a poem that he wrote and then basically asked AI to plagiarize the poem. And if you'll be able to tell the difference, because we looked at them both on the episode, and I was really scared I was going to get it wrong. So you'll have to see if I did.
Yeah, that was really fun. A really fun episode, too.
Yeah.
I mean, an important one, too, talking about AI in the future and how to use it to your advantage and not let it ruin the world.
Yeah, and I'm getting feedback I was too positive on that, so I
are you?
enjoy that. I enjoy that.
How dare you be positive?
I enjoy it. I got to be positive. Yeah. All right.
All right. So it's on the Poetry Space if you want to watch that. That's Katie's podcast on iTunes or Spotify, whatever. Just type in the Poetry Space. And now, next week's guest on the Rattlecast, though, is going to be Chase Twitchell. So Chase has a poem in the new issue. She hasn't been around for a while, but she was in our Buddhist Poets issue. Wonderful poet and a Buddhist, like that would imply. And she was the longtime editor of a press. Copper Canyon ended up taking up that press, so she's great poetry roots, a lot of editing, a lot of publishing in her background, as well as some great poetry too. Should be a really fun discussion with Chase. That is Rattlecast number 273. She was interviewed in that issue, issue number 36, if anyone wants to go back and read that ahead of time. But Chase Twitch was the guest. Her newest book from Copper Canyon is Things as It Is. And so we'll be reading poems from there, probably some new poems too. That's next week's guest. Your prompt: recall a time that you acted poorly during winter and write a poem that crafts a different resolution to the incident. That'll be all next week, Sunday, December 15th, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great week in the meantime, and we'll talk to you later. Good night.
Good night.